All right. Greetings and welcome to the Branching PathCast. I'm Marley and I encircle myself in pepper to keep the demons in. Salt doesn't deter demons. Everybody knows that. Otherwise, why would they try to flee through my nose whenever I eat delicious salt-riddled things? Speaking of demons, let's open our chat by talking about some Pokemon, shall we? I was deeply addicted to Pokemon when I was first exposed to it. And everybody knows that the best kind of Pokemon is Ghost type and Psychic. Also, I love Ice. But October came early this year, and I'll be your ghost for this evening. And I would like to discuss what we can learn from looking at things through this fatal frame. Specifically, the original Pokemon Snap. What do you say is really popular about games? I know the hottest games usually relish in the praise they get from being on the rails shooters. Give us more shooters where we don't have to run around in a space. Who's got the time? Well, picture this, my pathologist. Channeling Mr. Cody for a moment. Let's say that there is a begrudged mechanic such as this implemented in a different flourishing franchise. How about fear? Because I love ghosts. In fact, I am one. So fear is a cover shooter, where in my experience you kill SWAT teams and then run terrified from a ghost. For those of whom are watching the video, please allow me to quickly address that I am now in fact a noise ghost. Yes, this extremely cute, spooky form is thanks to the amazing illustrator Chanharu. Please check out her amazing Instagram, which can be found in the link below. Her art is spooktacular. So what makes beer fun? For people who are into the franchise, I would imagine it would be the tactical action peppered with spectral spectacle, and through this specific spectacle lens, you can see that takes the properties and reimagines it as an on-rails shooter where you must alternate between shooting people whom pop up from behind objects, and also taking pictures of spooky ghosts would be a strange move. And I want to play this game, so maybe this is a brutally untapped market. But it would be a hard sell, probably, because I've heard so often that people find this kind of thing off-putting. It's a pet peeve for many when you see there's a turret section. And this is like saying, okay, you don't like turret sections? My whole game is one long turret section. And you'll be playing the same levels over and over again. What else do people like? How about someone with an extremely rigid, judgmental perspective critiquing your artistic gaze harshly after each run? But that is exactly the extremely compelling game that is Pokemon Snap. And there are other instances of this kind of game performing well, but generally they arise from the brood sacs laid in the dark, moist arcade ecosystems and are thought to be a dead-end evolutionary branch. Citation needed. Let's explore the ways in which this forlorn peeve of many was raised as a pet ache, and how perspective may shift from perturbing poltergeists to an embarrassment of lich's mindset. The fun of Pokemon is in the collection aspect, which has been front and center to the franchise, and there have been safari components already present in the mainline Pokemon games, but I'm sure some were a bit ghastly when they found this was proposed, and Professor Oak has mad grandpa energy that is very pleasant. It makes it very encouraging, and it is innately fun to be tasked with initially going out into the unknown and documenting things. This is a strong setup. A fickle judgment of the photos are also an extremely integral part of the camera mechanics. However, the implementation in Pokemon Snap, or in my imagined example, posthumous, I guess it would be social media framed as a judgment mechanic, or a pet hit click. Lends me your fear, click a bod, frame. But there is a good framing to compel you to continue at this point. And then you begin the never-ending loop, whereby you are riding on a track through a 3D environment, and all you may do initially is take pictures, of which you have a limited amount. So it's immediately understandable and highly restricted circumstance, but the small ways that you may influence the environment by taking photos and the added mechanics later to manipulate the environment is strangely pleasant. And while there have been other photography implementations in games, this strong core loop is the best that I have encountered. Photography is a main component of Dead Rising, for example, where you are encouraged to take photographs of zombies in different situations, and the photos are judged immediately, taking into account many similar things that Pokemon Snap considers. Things like position in frame, size, theme, how numerous the subject captured is, and counterintuitively, in my mind, this instant feedback makes it far less mechanically compelling. It breaks the flow, especially when you're trying a specific moment in real time, when you're trying to capture it rather. It's similar to the stutter, where your friend perishes in a multiplayer platformer, which interrupts your timing enough just for you to now plummet to your demise. Stutter step. It's amusing to ride through the same tracks, attempting to discover and manipulate the creatures such that you please the strange old man. The end sees you choose one from a set of each Pokemon taken, and then they are judged. This is very fun, as the wild exclamations and abject dismissal of your submissions is surprisingly motivating. What makes the restrictive nature of this so fun? We've taken away most of the mechanics that players claim they value. There is almost no freedom to navigate a space in many senses, but rather than a large expanse to explore, there is something uniquely rewarding about getting to know deeply a small, dense environment, and returning to a location with new equipment makes things somewhat fresh. This is, in essence, turret shooter of the game. You may only pivot and shoot, and you do the levels repeatedly, but the puzzle-solving aspect, the Pokemon skin, and the overall framing make it extremely rewarding, and this is raising your pet kick. The embracing of something that is usually perturbing and the elevating of it to something that is paradoxically sought and cherished. There is often a way to shift something that is perceived as perpetually vexing and skew it into something that is actually enjoyable, but the presentation of and development of the experience may be a bit more fragile than others. While there is more room to falter in something like poor design in a horror shooter, having lackluster design is going to fatigue players much more swiftly in something like an on-rails shooter, which has a recoiling effect to most. It begs the question, what other off-railed against aspects that make their way into many games are not in themselves resigned to failure, but designed to failure? It seems like there could be interesting things to explore in entertaining aggressively antagonistic prototypes. I am playing an RPG and have been enjoying, for instance, and at one point I was going to release one of my companions from the party to make room for another, and they left briefly, however, after a moment rejoined, refusing my request they depart, and I love this. Combined with many other aspects of this character, the small things they've been doing to subvert my expectations are building a much more powerful idea of who she is as a person and giving her depth. This, in a game where the actual story and opportunity for choice is fairly obscured and the dialogue sparse. In studying script writing, it has been exemplified that actions speak louder than words, and where characters may speak all day of how they would cut off their nose to spite their face, or burn the ship down before they walk the plank, an hour of this kind of talk does nothing to communicate at this point, like 10 seconds of observing someone. For example, the introductory scene in the original is the thing where McCreary is on the precipice of confronting loss to a computer in chess, and he pours his coffee, or maybe it's like liquor, but he pours it into the computer, destroying it in response. This tells us everything we need to know about McCreary. I hope it's McCreary. It might be McCready. But back to the character example. The kind of subversion is awesome, and I have long been captivated by this idea. An RPG is about having the ability to manage and make choices about your party and how they develop. And I may merely be in the dark about cutting edge RPG experiences, but I am captivated by the taking away of that freedom in favor of revolting characters. The same character who will not leave when requested also leaves without ability to stop her when we enter a certain area. This lives in my head rent-free and has fleshed out the character more than dialogue may allow. There is another game that I can't get out of my head. It lives there alongside the recent song Hayura Konde and that one Watch Out for Fireballs adjacent podcast Adaptive Decay where they camp out on Spider Skellington. I believe it is called HR2 Messengers of Doom, and I've not had success in playing it as the version I bought seems to only be in French, and as Nihongo to Eigo dake hanaseru no de, ça va mal. But as I understand it, you roam a sprawling open world, and there are a variety of people you may attempt to recruit into your party, and these people will be more or less inclined to accompany you based on your alignment with their goals and your party vibe. However, as it also is the case that your party may exercise their democratic rights and vote against the person getting in, they can nix it. It may be that you vote someone in who takes off with your goods during the night, or perhaps one or several of the team declare it is a despised person who leaves the group, or they do. Perhaps tension builds and a murder is committed. I love the idea that there's all this relational drama inside the party, and that you exercise somehow a low influence of control over things, despite your directing things. I believe it was also Majesty that had a similar twisted aspect to it, and I love this as well. It's like a unique RTS builder where you make buildings and recruit units in a high fantasy setting. However, as there are things that must be done, you may only make them desirable. The units venture to do what seems motivating to them, so you may put a price on the head of a roaming dragon that concerns you, but if the price is not compelling enough, you won't get the attention of the person who's capable of toppling the creature. It's a fairly basic implementation, with the weighing of available goods in buildings, types and quantity of building, and allocation of money placed on creatures and opposing buildings. But this is a really fresh take on something that I feel deserves further exploration. The denial of player decision can be a really effective way in communicating a lot with a little and make things interesting and serve as a payoff of previous choice rather than the mere denial of the current choice and dampening the player expression. The removal of player choice and the increasing freedom of entities moves the game away from operating in the realm of puzzles and moves it towards a story generation machine. These examples revolve around something that I can never get out of my head. The notion that when you are capable of loving the most about someone is the same exact thing you are capable of despising the most in them if they are to be perceived in a negative light. For example, while you may love most the steadfast resolve of a person you deeply admire, it may grow to become a rigid and bullheaded framework you despise in your now begrudging companion. These things are not highlights of a core aspect of the person, but rather a framing of a recognized aspect of another distorted by your perspective. And this is why protagonist and antagonist are written in classic story structure so often is mirroring aspects explored in the story. The antagonist is often a dark future of the protagonist if they fail to recognize and overcome the core flaw in themselves. The simultaneous empathizing of the protagonist and their worldview, distortion and all, comes into conflict with the antagonistic perspective of the world, and where they are eventually revealed to be two sides of the same coin during reflection, it can be powerful to challenge perspectives of the audience who now grapple with the dissonance of holding equal positions in opposite light. And then they're forced to collapse their now opposing views into a new understanding that must break free from the abstracted frameworks to be interrogated deeply. Allow me to delve into wordplay. Terrifying wordplay that will shake you to your mortal core. To explore the notion of pet peeve, of ick, and then of pet ick. Firstly, what is the idea of pet that does a lot of work up front? A pet is a non-human animal that is kept, looked after, fed, and you spend a lot of time around it. A relationship with a pet is not always rosy, and the notion of having a pet peeve can be understood as alluding to the more begrudging relationship some pet ownership entails. In this instance, the pet may be perpetually in the dreaded equivalent of terrible two, where they are uniquely positioned to inspire in you powerful revolt, rage, and disgust. Why won't they just come back in the house? They learned to do this, and they were doing it consistently. And now they run around the yard screaming with joy, carrying something you pray they do not ingest, easily outpacing you. Speaking of hypotheticals, of course, but the notion of a pet peeve, something that arises in you readily and uniquely a frustration, and basically lives in your head, exerting a unique power over you. This is a useful and obviously resonant concept given the pace it was incorporated into modern parlance, and it's old, because words age like milk and fall apart like shoes. Ick is in. And I welcome the replacement of pet peeve, as the word is phonetically disgusting at best. Ick is by contrast pleasant to say and inspires in me a previous repulsion while maintaining a paradoxical cute nature. It seems like a modernizing of peeve in many ways. It is the creation of further distance in many ways from the feeling, and is akin to the spoopification, if you would allow me to be so vulgar. The rise of spoopy variants of previously horrific creatures over time has been discussed by others, such as Stuff to Blow Your Mind. Really, it is plain to see the incremental and natural exercising of control over things that language enables. Things without words or description remain incomprehensible, which in some ways flies in the face of show, don't tell on the face of it. But to be greatly impacted in a way that is comprehensible, and to be able to morph and integrate that comprehension into an increasingly useful and sophisticated manner is another thing entirely. For example, early in human history, humanity was besieged by natural occurrences that were not familiar. Then, through symbolic representation, it was possible to begin to take these events and link them to understanding and reduce them into subjects that were more easily grappled with. The simple rendering of something into a symbolic image or the naming of something gives a means of control that is not possible otherwise. The ravaging, unpredictable power of the sea can be reduced by linking it to an anthropomorphic god with explanatory personality, rationality, and modes of acquiescence. This also opens the door to assign blame and meaning where there is none, and it may help closure and processing. To deal with the felt helplessness, early depictions were oft terrifying and brutal. Horror monsters are depicted in a similar fashion, personifying something that is being explored in a way only such abstraction in mythological storytelling can examine. These creatures begin as horrific manifestations, and over time become familiar. As this occurs, there is a trend where they become gradually less abjectly horrific and more cute, and for lack of a better word, domesticated. It often mirrors the transformation of domesticated animals, such as the effect of the perpetual keeping of pets. The difference is comparing wolves to dogs, whom have in many instances been artificially shaped to weigh in favor of more infantile aspects. Many breeds now grow into larger puppies rather than the more mature forms that the wilds would favor. And now that terror of Dracula is replaced by the chibi kawaii Dracula pillow adorning my home office, hypothetically speaking, of course, the interesting or the increasing exploration and familiarity of these things take what was once repulsive and frightening and transmogrify them into adorbs versions that are pleasant and comforting. This is in some way the pseudo-control exerted over things, although it's not as false as it seems, as the power of comprehension and perspective and symbolic connection and abstraction is extremely impactful in how people experience reality in a practical way. The heart of the pet peeve of the ick is not so much the thing, but the perception of the thing and what it means in relation to you, or what it says about you. The reaction that you have in the presence of the ick is the consequence of past experience, conditional training, perception, and framing, a heuristic-driven response based on subjective input and processing, not an objective response to reality. And in smashing together unceremoniously the notions of pet peeve and of ick, we can get pet ick, which is me, my, yeah, we can get pet ick, which to me immediately swings from the arm's length, recoil-inducing, running away screaming, visceral feeling of pet peeve and ick, and towards the accepting without judgment, with curiosity, and long-term commitment of pet ick, where not good or bad, merely it is what it is. And there's nothing more powerful than the acceptance of and making room for your pet ick. Bringing this back to game design, there are no bad game design mechanics, only poor implementations. Perhaps your on-rails shooter or turret sequence just isn't done in the right spirit, or without the optimal framing. Maybe your level system just needs some pepper to repel those peevish demons. It could be that the real icky bug is actually a feature, turning a prototype into an entirely new game. The reimagining of thou shalt nots into maybe thou shalt in this way or that context may open up avenues for interesting new game spaces to explore, like the exploration of a terrifying mansion ripe with hungry ghosts. Just remember, those skin-crawling figments of today are the cutesy cuddle throws of tomorrow day. I'm Marley, and this has been, or should I say never was, this hostess of the Branching PathCast, or should I say, brooding poltergeist. Now, check out these amazing illustrations, please, by Chanharu via her Instagram, which can be found in the description below. I hope you have fun raising your pet icks into the companions and strange tension-having roommates that they have the possibility to manifest as. Please, take care.